Bow, 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 bow. Bow, 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 bow. Bow, 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 bow. Bow, 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 bow.
Hi, you may not know me, but my name is BABILA, and welcome to Things I Thought Of, a show where I talk about things that I thought of. Have y'all been on TikTok recently? A silly question, I know. I don't know if y'all's For You page is looking like mine, but there are a lot of TikToks circulating about a particular topic: the female gaze. Is this a potentially super outdated idea on TikTok now? Perhaps. Does this speak to the ever-changing nature of the internet? Most definitely. So my goal was to understand the topic itself, because I feel like my baseline understanding of it was alright, but the more research I did, the more I realized I didn't get what I was talking about. Today we're going to talk about some psychology topics, and just a quick disclaimer. You see the spot right here? That's where my psych degree would go if I had one. I would like to preface this with the fact that I am not a professional, and I'm just doing my best to think critically about a pop culture topic. There were definitely a few times while doing my research for this video that I got my brain tied up in a knot, but I think I get it now. So let's get right into it. The male gaze is a concept that was originally coined by a film theorist named Laura Mulvey. I'm going to be saying her name a lot throughout all of this. We're going to dive into a lot of ways I now understand the male gaze to exist in media, and how it relates to the female gaze in its existence. Mulvey's work, however, starts with the male gaze in media. Okay, so Mulvey's concept of the male gaze originates from how it's portrayed in cinema. She states that films are often recorded to appeal to a masculine audience. One of the biggest points that she makes is that the male gaze objectifies women. When women appear on screen as narrative objects, they often halt narrative progress, and we're encouraged to possess them with our gaze. This takes away the individual agency of the woman and whatever their desires may be. So, for example, in Return of the Jedi, the Princess Leia slave Leia scene with Jabba. In this scene, the screen frames Leia in this bikini under almost a literal spotlight. The narrative is paused for about 5 seconds for the audience and this thing to just look at her. This is a perfect example of one of the key tenets of the male gaze, which is scopophilia, or the sexual pleasure that comes from looking. I was watching a film lecture about this, which you can find in the card up there, that said in reference to scopophilia and its effects on the male gaze. When you look at something, you make it intelligible to you. It's something that you can understand. Suddenly, it's something you don't fear, that you have command over, in a colloquial way. Mulvey writes, under the male gaze, women are to be looked at, and men are the bearer of the look. So yeah, taking away individual agency of said woman, pausing the narrative to do so, while also taking attention away from what her individual desires could be. Because in this instance, she is an object. There's also a counter tenet which I don't think is a word, to scopophilia, which is sadistic voyeurism, which tends to result in the punishment of the woman. For example, in the DreamWorks movie Megamind, Hal has been seeing Roxanne as the object of his affection for basically the entire film. In his observance of her, he doesn't necessarily consider what her individual desires and wants can be. All he's focusing on is being able to acquire her as a mate. In one instance, after he powers up to become Titan, I'm sorry if that's a spoiler, when his affection isn't reciprocated, Roxanne is put in immediate danger. First off, can we talk about this? This is traumatic.
Almost died.
Look at the way he's literally throwing her all over the place. It literally does not get more dangerous than this. Also, there's this clip.
There is no Easter Bunny, there is no Tooth Fairy, and there is no Queen of England.
Poignant. Yet also true. I definitely stole that joke. Man, the tone of this video is already so all over the place. Okay, so we talked about the male gaze and how it stands in an objectification standpoint, but there's one thing that I want to talk about that's going to come up a little bit more in the compare and contrast section. There's going to be a compare and contrast section. The ego ideal, first coined by our good old mommy lover Sigmund Freud. The ego ideal is what you want to become. Mulvey postulates, this is an oversimplification by the way, just to get us to be at a baseline understanding. Remember, no degree. Just as a baby sees itself in the mirror as a complete version of itself, in media men often look at what's on the screen as a reflection of who they should be. The screen acting like a mirror or like a frame of reference for who they should be in real life. On screen, men occupy the main focus. Women often occupy more passive roles while the men are taking active roles. And as we talked about earlier, women are seen as objects and they're not necessarily having their individual wants or desires being considered. This whole This whole screen and mirror equivalency and the concept of one self-actualizing through seeing their reflection is a way for men to use what they see on screen as a way to form their ego ideal, what you want to emulate and what you want to become. We'll get more into what this connection means a little later. For right now, let's take a quick pause and talk about the concept that really caught my attention, the female gaze. Okay, first things first, what is it and is it the same? To start off, no. What are you, silly? Some people argue that it doesn't even exist. It might not be my place to set the definition or even decide whether or not it exists, but here's my understanding of the concept. The largest difference, as in most situations, is a difference in power and power dynamics. In most understandings of the gaze itself is an analysis of power structures. For example, the male gaze, the straight gaze, the white gaze, the rich gaze, all are analyses of different power dynamics between the subject and the onlooker. For example, the straight gaze is a straight person gazing upon a queer person. And the concept itself is kind of an analysis between the two. One being the one that holds a societal power over the other. But what makes the female gaze different is that it's not necessarily an analysis between two different groups that have different levels of societal power. Instead, it's an admiring or analysis of the agency, wants, and desires of whoever the subject is. In allowing the subject to maintain agency, it allows you to gain a deeper understanding of your subject. You can understand why something is rather than just seeing that it is. One argument that a lot of people like to make is that the female gaze is exactly that of the male gaze, except just put on men. One of the most common examples is the movie Magic Mike. But when you think about it from the perspective of the male gaze being the objectification of the subject, in reality, Magic Mike isn't the female gaze. It's the male gaze where the subject happens to be a man. In reality, the female gaze is focused on the individual desires of the person of focus. It's an attempt to gain a general understanding of the subject. We'll get into some more examples later. But for now, I think it's time for that thing that we talked about, the compare and contrast section. From what I'm gathering, we can talk about the male and female gaze from 3 different perspectives. The media perspective, a societal perspective, and a perspective. From a media perspective, we've discussed this at length. The male gaze is what most things are framed under. A framing where the subject lacks agency and desire and become an object of the scene, while the female gaze gives agency to the subject and encourages the audience to explore that. From a societal perspective, there are some implications that come with the male gaze that don't come with the female gaze. One of them being our good friend, patriarchy. Hello. Thank you. Hey, buddy. Buddy? Yeah, that feels inappropriate. Would you like to... I'll take it from here. Basically, I'm what's backing this male gaze or whatever, and adding to an unbalanced power dynamic that also makes women feel bad or whatever. You don't have to keep on adding "oh whatever" to the end of everything to make it seem like you don't care about what we're talking about. Whatever, man, shut up. Basically, the power that this male gaze holds in society helps contribute to unreasonable standards for women. Standards for how their body should look, what they're capable of, and stuff like that. It can lead to anxiety and insecurity because no matter what, no one will be able to reach its unattainable standards. It's kind of this whole, the anxious realization that you're being looked at type beat. There's also this whole objectification thing, which, takes away agency. Unusually based patriarchy moment. Later, Chach. That was a weird bit. The tone of this video is strange. Okay, remember how earlier I talked about how the male gaze has 2 countertenets? I've discussed scopophilia at length, but let's talk about sadistic voyeurism real quick. I've talked about scopophilia at length. Its objectification leads to not taking into account the wants and goals of women as individuals. In real life, not just as characters. But the unfortunate countertenet is sadistic voyeurism. Sadistic voyeurism can lead to really messed up real life things. Stuff like stalking, trafficking, literal violence. Stuff that sucks, obviously. You know what doesn't do all of that? The female gaze. The female gaze, to my understanding, really just causes us to think more deeply about the things that we see. I don't necessarily see any problems with admiring someone through what my observations say about their character, respectfully. Media and society has created an ego ideal for men where it makes it kind of difficult to truly look more deeply into something past the first degree. This framing is what I think makes it so difficult for us to be able to understand the female gaze as a concept, because sometimes the first thing that we think isn't that, this individual, this subject has their own individual wants, agency, and desires. This is a human being that has aspirations. This is a human being that has a family, not just somebody that should be looked at. This also makes it so that the critical thinking behind observations isn't necessarily there sometimes too. Sometimes looking at the subject as an object makes us forget that there's reasons why people do things. This leads to the last thing, the perspective. The individual perspective. I'm so good at words, as you can hear.
Ooh, he's trying!
It's how individuals tend to see the world. From my understanding, through the male gaze, you see what is. This person is wearing a Rolex, therefore they have money. Or Henry Cavill is attractive because body. The object in the situation gets analysis to one degree. X is true through my lens, therefore Y is true. The female gaze, however, not only looks at what is, but also looks at what it means, or what does it say about the subject. It's analysis of the present subtext. Not just X, therefore Y, but X, therefore Y because Z. Or X does Y, therefore Z. Another way of thinking of it is that the male gaze is about objectification, while the female gaze is about personification. I got this from The Take, a channel that I love, by the way. Let's view some examples from some TikToks that I found.
I've literally never even considered the female gaze as a thing, but it definitely exists. The way I resonated with it is every time I get dressed, I'm appealing to women. Like, a guy doesn't care that you're wearing a new Paloma wool pant, but a girl would notice and be like, oh, she's probably cool. Or whatever it is, depending on the type of person you are. We get dressed to signal to other people who we are and what kind of person we are, and we get to decide that.
Henry Cavill. I mean, no one can deny that this is a classically beautiful, handsome man. Men, why do I squeeze my thighs together at the thought of this man? Answer, quickly. No, it's not Geralt. No, it's not Snooperman. Snooperman! It's because he's a goofy nerd. It's because he wears a lion hat when he goes running. He plays D&D in his basement. And he loves his dog. I mean...
He's a 10, but he paints his nails.
15.
Why?
Because he's comfortable in his masculinity.
I love every time you see a dude's reaction when a girl's like, I don't know, I think painted nails on a guy's cool. You just watch the guy's brain malfunction because he's like, but that's feminine. He's not a man. I'm doing stereotypical man things and I bought you stuff. Why don't you like me? I don't know, Roger, probably because your only personality trait is man. Most of the time, it's not the nails that she likes. She likes that he's doing what he wants, looking how he wants, and not caring how someone feels.
It's not about what you're seeing. It's about how what you see. It's about what you're seeing. What? It's not just about what you're seeing. It's what you're seeing and what it implies and what it means about that person. We're looking at all people like they're humans. Final thoughts. So like I was saying before, I'm someone who's socialized to be able to see things through the male gaze. So when I was initially looking at these TikToks, it was generally confusing to me. I was just like, yeah, I mean, I see how these conventionally attractive people aren't necessarily what draws the attention of women, but it wasn't clicking with me past that point. Going further into my research, me understanding the male gaze at a more fundamental level helped me kind of understand what I was missing a little bit. It's still good to get a better understanding of people's perspectives. It was difficult for me to get, but it's still a thing that I thought of.